Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is Shaminder, and in today's video, I'm going to give a walkthrough of how to debug D365 web resources right within Visual Studio Code. We'll also look at the process of binding a D365 web resource to a local file that sits into your local machine. And we'll do that via Fiddler because during the development process, you may end up making a lot of changes. And then if you have to deploy every change to D365 web server and then debug it, that's not an ideal debugging experience. So that's where we'll simplify that process by hooking your D365 web resource to your local file via Fiddler. And once we have that configured, then we will see the process of associating your browser to the Visual Studio Code debugging context. And once we have married all of these things together, then uh, we'll go into D365 and we'll see, okay, as I have hit a breakpoint, that breakpoint would eventually land me within the Visual Studio Code itself. Okay, so what I have over here is a very simple JavaScript file. What it does is it pulls the form context from execution context. It gets this name attribute value, and if the name is blank, it sets the value to JS demo. Okay, now to do the setup, the first thing you'll have to do is you'll have to install Fiddler. And I use Fiddler Classic, but you can use the latest version of the Fiddler as well. And then you'll have to go to Tools, Options, under HTTPS, Capture HTTPS, Connects, Decrypt, traffic from browsers only, ignore certificate error, and then hit OK. So when you basically start Fiddler, what it does is behind the scenes, it create a proxy, and then that proxy is like a middleman. It's intercepting all the network requests that your browser is making, and then before they are forwarded to the end server, now you have an opportunity to manipulate or change those network requests using Fiddler. Okay, so we'll do that now. But the prerequisite is having the Fiddler installed, and then go to your Visual Studio Code. Over here, if you go to run, you'll see the start debugging. Yeah, so click on it, and then let me just move this guy a little bit here. Yeah, go to run, hit start debugging, and then you'll see options over here. And depending on the browser that you are using, you'll select that browser. Uh, and then what it does is it creates a launch.json file for you. Now, the default launch file which it would generate is basically uh, assuming that you are going to run it in localhost mode, and then it's basically a brand new site that you have developed rather than an already existing site. So this is where you cannot use this configuration. So I would say just go ahead and remove this, and then click on add configuration, and you'll see this Chrome attached. So click on it, and what it would do is it'll create this JSON configuration. And the key thing over here is, you see the request mode has changed from launch to attach, and then this port is by default set to 9222. Now, this port is the remote debugging port for Chromium-based browsers. So even if you are using Edge, you'll see the same port being uh, shown here in the configuration, right? So name, you could give it any name. So I'll just say, okay, debug D365 web resource, and save it. The next thing you'll have to do is uh, you'll have to open Chrome in the debugging mode. So you don't have to go into the Chrome manually. Instead, you can use terminal. So by default, your Chrome is installed in program files under Google folder. Yeah, and there's this exe called chrome.exe. which is run when you click on the Chrome icon in your desktop. Right. So what we'll do is we'll programmatically invoke this chrome.exe, but while invoking, we will pass it few arguments, and those arguments would basically tell Chrome that, hey, when you run Chrome, run it in the debug mode and attach it to this port that we have configured over here. So in that way, our end-to-end process would work because now we have a session which is running on this port, and we have a configuration which is basically listening to the activities happening on that port and then relaying those activities to Visual Studio Code. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll say, okay, this is the, oops, sorry, that I want to run chrome.exe, and then, yeah, so I want to run it on this port 9222, and then this, the browsing that I'm doing, any data related to that, just store it into this temp directory. Okay. So now when I hit enter, you would see, okay, it opened Chrome. And now this is where I would utilize, now this is the session where I would do all of my web browsing activities and then bind them to my Visual Studio Code. Okay, so the next thing I would like to do is I'll go to my D365. Right, so this is my environment. I have the Sales Hub app, and over here I have the accounts list, and I binded that web resource file on load of account. So you see, as of now, it's running like this. And the first thing I'll do is, right, so what I would like you guys to do is when you open your network tab, just hit disable cache, because then every time you refresh your page, it goes and pulls it from the server. Okay, and what we are looking at is, I'll remove the breakpoint for a minute. Yeah. So what we are looking at is in the network tab, if I go, right, this file SSB underscore account. So this is basically the name of my web resource that contains this JavaScript code. And then the other thing I want you guys to take a note of is, okay. Now, the other thing I want you guys to do is go into your application tab over here and make sure you have this bypass for network checked. Because if you don't have it checked, then what will happen is, I'll just show you that in a minute. Yeah, let me just drag this guy a little bit over here. Okay, right. So if I uncheck this and go back to my network tab and then bring Yeah, you see, if I go back to headers, it says served from service worker. Right. So what it is doing is it's basically loading. Once you have fetched it for the first time, it makes the network call to the web server, but then subsequently what it does is it puts it in a service worker and it no longer makes a network request. So then the issue with that is, you know, Fiddler can only track if it's an actual network request and it's being going over the web and then, you know, yeah, and then going to the end server, not loading from a service worker that is running within the app, because then it's not a network request that Fiddler can see. Okay, so going to application and then checking this would disable it. And now if I Right. So you see now it no longer shows that it's served from the service way that service worker. Okay. All right. Now, the next thing I would do is I have my fiddler here. I'll start capturing the traffic. And if I go back and hit refresh, okay, just a sec. Well, so that's where you go. Um, I started the traffic, and if I go back and refresh it one more time, it should now make that request again. And now if I go back to my fiddler and look for that request, yes, I see that over here. Okay, so the next thing I would do is you'll see this autoresponder tab. Now, this is where I'm doing man in the middle. That, okay, I've seen this request, that Fiddler, that, hey, thank you for tracking it for me. Now, what I want you to do is whenever you see this request coming in, you go and instead of serving this file from the actual server, you serve it from my location. So this is what I'm telling it to do. Okay, just a sec. Okay. And then make sure you have this checkbox enabled. Okay. So what this would do is, okay, the moment it sees this request, it'll go to this location and find this file and send that file as a response. So now if I go over here, you'll see here in the response, I have this, but in my Visual Studio Code, if I go to my account.js, I've added this test comment. So now if I've done everything correctly, and the moment I reload this, I should see the file being served from my local, and that's what I want, right? So now I could make the changes to this file locally, and I don't have to deploy the file, and I can test it. Okay, so we've done the first step where everything is now configured from the Fiddler standpoint. We are able to track that file and map it to our local machine. Now the next step is to set the breakpoint and then have that breakpoint come to our Visual Studio Code. Okay, so we have already done the configuration of that attach process. And now if I go and I hit the debugger, it's basically now listening to requests coming from that uh, port 9222 and the process which is running on that port, which is the chrome.exe. Okay, so now I come over here, I'll go to my sources and I'll just put a breakpoint over here. And if I refresh now, so ideally what I'm expecting is it should go into Visual Studio Code and get that breakpoint over here also, right? So that's what I did. Now I'm able to get, yeah, I'm able to get the form context over here, right? So this is what you would typically see in your web browser when you're debugging it. But now the advantage I have is, okay, I can do everything from my IDE. I don't have to leave my IDE and then um, I can track everything from here. Yeah. So, okay, the name is null and then it goes over here. It does, right. So this gives me the advantage of using Visual Studio Code and then doing the things that I'm familiar doing with an IDE. Right. So example, if I have to, to evaluate in the debug console, I can come over here and then, right, I could say from context, right? So yeah, now I can do all those things right within Visual Studio Code, not the browser. So that's the advantage of it. Now we could do this with TypeScript also. I did it with the basic JavaScript. So if you guys want to know how we can do it with the TypeScript and PCF also, let me know and I'll make a video of it. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope this was helpful. Yeah, take care. Bye.